Thank you, Father, for being with us, for sending your great comforter, the Holy Spirit. Give us wisdom, insight into your word, discernment of every letter of your word, that we may gain in our understanding and come closer to you in the process, Father, as you increase our faith. In the name of the Son, Yeshua, hallelujah. This is study number 21, and we're still in Babylon. Actually, metaphorically and literally, we're still in Babylon. It is carried over through the millennia. Our traditions, we don't realize as Christians how many Babylonian traditions have continued into modern times. And that's the reason I'm spending so much time on this video. I've got two or maybe three different individuals that are going to be part of this video. But I want to start off, something that's concerned me in prophecy is whether or not the actual Babylon in Iraq needs to become a world superpower before the return of Yeshua. And what perplexes me is this. For a long time, I think I understand it clearly now, but what has perplexed me is this verse from Isaiah. We read from Isaiah in the previous video, or maybe the video before that. Isaiah chapter 13, 19 through 21. In Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees. Now, when we say that beauty of the Chaldees, you heard Chuck Missler mention it as well. The beauty of the Chaldees' excellency makes us think that it has to go back to that geographical location of the Chaldeans. No, that's not it at all. I've really had to ponder on this to come to the conclusion there is absolutely no way that in a short amount of time, let's say, obviously we know that we're coming here very close to the end. There's just no time left to accomplish what the Vatican has accomplished, going all the way back to Emperor Constantine, who I'm going to end up making a whole video just on him, I believe, and how this happened, where it began and how it happened, how we got so confused here. It began 325 AD under Emperor Constantine. There's just no way that the 1700 years of atrocities, deceptions, crimes that have been committed under the papacy of the Catholic Church could be duplicated in a short amount of time to parallel what has already been done and still justify the amount of destruction that has to come on Babylon because of its crimes. Let's read this, Isaiah chapter 13, 19 through 21. In Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees' excellency shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. I'm going to do another video on that too. It's coming up. It shall never be inhabited, neither shall it be dwelt in from generation to generation, neither shall the Arabian pitch tent there, neither shall the shepherds. In other words, it's uninhabitable. The wild beasts of the desert shall lie there, their houses shall be full of doleful creatures, owls and satyrs, that's the demons. Now, let's go forward to the book that's been dedicated to Mystery Babylon, the book of Revelation. And I'm going to have to do a study on the book of Revelation real quick, possibly, in one of these upcoming videos, to clarify the rapture. That there's so many discussions, so many disagreements between Christians on whether or not we're pre-rapture, we're raptured before the tribulation, as Noah was. Noah didn't start gathering wood in the middle of a flood. Or if we're in the middle of the tribulation, which makes no sense if you understand the Galilean Jewish wedding ceremony, the 7-day wedding ceremony, represented by the 7 years in the tribulation. Or do we all have to suffer all the way through the 7 years and wait for the return, the second advent, at the end of the 7-year tribulation? I'm going to do an entire video on this to explain and break down with verses. I'm going to compare the verses that people use to come up with the pre-trib and in-trib theories And then I'm going to lay out why I believe, based on Scripture, that it has to be a pre-tribulation rapture. Has to be. There's just nothing else that makes sense, and there's too many Scriptures that confer with that, or concur rather. I think my English is, I don't know what's wrong with me lately. Go to Revelation 18, verses 1 through 4. Now remember that almost this entire book seems to be dedicated to the destruction of Babylon. We have Mystery Babylon, it's written on our forehead, the great harlot, in chapter 17. And after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power. The earth was lightened by his glory. This is a good guy. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, is fallen. Okay, two Babylons. One already fell, now the other one is falling. Well, they're both fallen. But you see what I mean? There's only two. There's not three. If there was going to be another Babylon besides the Catholic Church, it would be fallen, is fallen, is fallen. There'd have to be three of them there. It has become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. Now, fornication, when we're talking about the woman, the harlot, that's the church. The fornication, these are crimes of the church, deceptions and lies of the church. And the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. And the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. I mean, there's just no mistake about it. And I'm not the one, I've just read a lot. And I'm going to suggest that you do the same. I'm not the one making up these theories. I mean, I'm reading these verses and understanding them. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues. Now, the book of Revelation, chapter 6 through 18, is dedicated to the 7-year tribulation. The first few chapters are breaking down, if you go into the letters to the churches, it's which churches are going to be, actually there's only one church. I don't want to get into it right now. Don't want to reveal that just yet. I'm going to put it together in another video. One church is the bride of Christ. 6 churches are going to have to go through the destruction along with Babylon in this end. And then the last chapters, of course, are, is the good news. Chapters 19 through the end of the book is that's the good part. That's where we come in. So, we can't quite let go of this. It's Babylon is real. It's here. It has risen to a global power. It has not totally fulfilled its power yet. That is yet to come. But Babylon has been maintained in the Vatican. They have built a throne to Lucifer in the base of the Vatican. I'll see if I can find a photo of that to put up here. But the bottom line is that Babylon has never ceased to be under construction. It never ceased. From the time of Nimrod, it has not ceased. And I know this is going to be painful for a lot of people, but I've got to expose some of these traditions that are not biblical that we need to do away with. All right, don't stop. Don't turn the video off. Stay with it, because we have to know these things. His return is imminent. It's coming. We have to throw this trash out, this garbage out of our lives, out of our culture. If we want to be accepted and not have to go through the tribulation, I really think, at some point in the information age, there's not going to be any excuse for ignorance. At some point, God's going to say, hey, you just didn't want to take the time to learn this. I don't have any sympathy for you if you don't want to take the time to learn the things that anger me. Well, all right, let's move on. I've got a lot to get to here, and I want to show you a couple things, and we're going to get on with a couple of other videos that I'm going to share with you. This book is a resource that I highly recommend. Anybody that really wants to understand why There cannot be another Babylon except the one that already exists. I really suggest reading this book. Now you can get it in ebook, audible book, and that's what I did because it's kind of a heavy read. It's hard to get through, but in the audible book you can just keep playing it, and go back if you miss something, go back and play it again, and then use the book as a reference. I suggest having both. I do the audible, have the audible, and then I use the book as a reference. But I think it's a great resource, and I think that every Christian should take the time to read through it. Maybe not read all of it, but read enough. It's actually, most of it's pretty disgusting. It's going to make you sick to know the crimes of the popes. The Catholic Church has killed way more than Hitler ever dreamed of. And I've heard estimates as high as 2 to 300 million people over time. You have to go back to the Inquisitions and all of that. Now, do we hold those crimes against the modern day Catholic Church? Well, I think only if they continue to practice the same religion, which they do. So, I really suggest reading this one, and an alternative book is the one that I mentioned in the last video, The Two Babylons by Alexander Hislop. I got a lot out of that book. It really helps explain a lot, but it's more for, I would say, advanced study. For most people, it's probably better just get on with the gospel, understand biblical history, understand history in general, even outside of the Bible, and then apply all of that to the gospel. I think you're probably getting enough out of these videos to not have to go into all of that kind of literature, but it's valuable. It is very valuable. If you want to dig in deeper, I recommend it. Now, let's get on with Babylon and how it relates to most of our culture today. No one wants to hear that there's anything evil about a Christmas tree. But this goes back to Babylon. There's two different stories. I don't know which one of them is correct. So Semiramis, wife and mother of Nimrod, says that after Nimrod died, she saw an evergreen tree sprout up out of the ground to full size just in an instant. Of course, all of that stuff's made up. It was everything that she came up with. I'm not saying that any of that happened. What I'm saying is that they created those narratives to continue to deceive and manipulate the people. Just as, nothing's changed there, has it? Now, the other story is that when Tammuz was killed, the first, I should say, as instead of Antichrist, anti-Messiah, the first fake Messiah was Tammuz. And when he was killed by this wild boar, some of his blood spilled on a stump, and an evergreen tree sprouted out of it. Now, in both of these cases, they are phallic symbols. The Christmas tree is a phallic symbol. Let's look at a couple of things here in the Bible. And by the way, I hate to get too graphic, but the little round ornaments, if this is a phallic symbol, what are the little round ornaments? I don't want to, I'll let you figure it out. Let's go to Jeremiah. Jeremiah chapter 10. Now, anytime you see "Thus saith the Lord," you better pay attention. That's or like when it says "as it is written," you better pay attention. "Thus saith the Lord, learn not the way of the heathen, and be not dismayed at the signs of the heaven, for the heathen are dismayed at them." This is the December 25th, the weeping of Tammuz and all of that. The guy Michael Rood's going to be in this video that I'm sharing. He'll explain a lot of that. "For the customs of the people are vain, for one cutteth a tree out of the forest, the work of the hands of the workman with the axe. They deck it with silver and gold. They fasten it with nails and hammers that it not move." We all are guilty of this as Christians. This is what sits in our living room in the month of December. Now, there's another aspect of this in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 8, verse 17. And he said unto me, Hast thou seen this, O Son of Man? Is it a light thing to the house of Judah that they commit the abominations which they commit here? For they have filled the land with violence, and have returned to provoke me to anger. And lo, they put the branch to their nose. What was the branch? Was the Asherah pole. The Asherah pole took on many aspects. It began as this little Christmas tree, but it took on many aspects, the carvings of other gods and things. It was another phallic symbol thing too. All of this stuff, all of this that goes back to Babylon is sexual corruption, related to sexual corruption. I mean, all of their practices. You're going to hear more in these next videos. Really, please take this stuff to heart. Don't just say, yeah, but we know that Jesus is a reason for the season. Please, please take this stuff to heart. We have to prepare for the return of the Son of God. I don't think we can do that when we see how angry that God was with Israel for doing these things. Why would we want to take the risk of doing it ourselves? Now, he may not get angry about it. He may say, all that stuff's in the past, I've forgotten about it. I kind of doubt that. But why would you want to take the risk? I don't want to take the risk. I just don't understand why more people don't take this more seriously once they know. A lot of people know this stuff and continue on with it anyway. They really need to get this garbage. We really need to get this garbage out of our lives. Let's take a look here. I'm going to show you. This is an ancient Babylonian image during the time of Nimrod. Actually, during the time of Semiramis, after Nimrod. Here's the original Asherah pole, which is also, this was an evergreen tree. It says Semiramis in the picture. I don't know which one is Semiramis. Looks like the one on the left. I don't know who the one on the right is, if Nimrod's no longer there. But anyway, this is all deification related. They were making themselves into gods, and people believed them to be gods back then. Just like the guy that, not to rub it in too hard, but like the guy that sits up there in Rome and says he's God's representative on earth. This is an Asherah pole. This was the original Asherah pole. I don't want to share with you what they morphed into because it's pretty horrible, pretty hideous. You can, if you want to dig into it more, you can. But this is what we put in our living rooms every year. I'm telling you, this is not the reason for the season. This is not the reason for the season. If we're talking about the Son of God that we believe came and died for us 2,000 years ago, and this goes back almost 4,000 years, right around 3,800 years. It's not the reason for the season. Come on, we got to wake up. I think I'm going to go ahead and get started on these other videos here. You get the point. They've got a lot to talk about. I hope this doesn't get too long. I wanted to make sure and get this introduction in. I've got a lot more to get to. We've got to get to Constantine. There's a lot more we need to get around to, but enjoy. This is Michael Rood coming up, the man that I told you about in the last video. He does a great job of explaining this. There is something else I wanted to share real quick. This is a digital replica of Molech. Molech was the Canaanite Moabite god. Actually I believe was a monument to Satan himself, where they did the child sacrifice on December 25th, and they had priests. I mean, it was a very intricate ordeal, where the children that were born in that year were offered up to Molech in a fiery furnace, which is where the whole lump of coal thing comes from with Santa Claus. The kids that misbehave get a lump of coal. This is where it came from. Is they used coal to stoke the furnaces with, coal and other things. But that's where that notion originated. the parents of the children making the sacrifice on December 25th to Moloch would write up their prosperity list of wishes for the coming year and offer up this infant into the fiery furnace of Molech. We went over some of those scriptures in Leviticus 2 videos ago. I really suggest doing some research on Molech, because this is all of this December 25th abominations are the origins of our Christmas celebration. This is why the pioneers of America, this was illegal in America. Anything to do with December 25th celebrations was strictly prohibited, with the state of Alabama being the last state in the nation to legalize December 25th activities because of all the Europeans coming over with their Catholic traditions. From 1700, up into the 1800s, the late 1700s up into the mid 1800s, you had this wave of Europeans coming in that were bringing all the Catholic traditions with them. So the early Protestants that founded the country, that founded the nation, they just got overran. They became a minority. So Protestantism died in this country in 1836, and I really believe that we need to revive it. I really wasn't going to go into all of this, but while we're on the subject, Santa Claus is not of Babylonian origin, but I got to touch on it because it's satanic. And I mean, it's obviously satanic. The more you study it, the more you look into it. Elves, by definition, were little demons. And the internet is being scrubbed of information like this. It's amazing. This organization called Ancient Origins, going back into humanity's past, as they like to say, they have a section here on the whole Santa Claus demon thing, elf demon thing. So this originated. It continues today. The satanic aspect of it continues today. Becoming less human. The ancient Norse elves lived in Alfheim, which literally means home of the elves or Elfland. The most prominent elves were light elves who were associated with the god Odin. I'm not going to put his picture up here. I want to get through this. They were very similar to humans, except they had a stronger connection to nature and were immortal. In contrast to the light elves, there were the dark elves who were associated with death and considered malevolent. Like nymphs, these elves were capable of breeding with humans. I mean, it's very possible that some things came that I just don't. I don't know. Anyway, that's all legend. It doesn't matter. The point is that the legend relates to Satan, and when we bring these things in our home, we're bringing satanic traditions. We're bringing satanic traditions in. We need to wake up. We need to wake up. Time's of the essence here. We got to get. We gotta throw this garbage away, like I keep saying. They continue. During the Middle Ages, elves began to become less human. For one thing, they became smaller. Male elves were considered ugly tricksters, while female were beautiful maidens who could be just as devious. They were known to lure men into secluded places with their beauty and kill them. Many diseases and strange occurrences were blamed on elves. Remember Jubilees chapter 10, when Noah petitioned before God, please stop these demons from attacking his lineage. For example, some sicknesses were called elf shot because they were believed to be caused by arrows fired from magic elfin bows. Infants born with unusual deformations or birthmarks were said to be elf marked. All right. So elves are satanic. The elves are demonic. That's end of story. Why would you want to celebrate this crap, this garbage, in association with the Son of God? This is an abomination. These are abominations to God. We need to get it out of our lives. Now I'm going to show you some video of how these December 25th traditions continue in the Nordic regions still today. These are modern times. This is in color, probably taken with a cell phone. This is modern. It's really ugly. So I want to get through it. I want to get on with something else, but We need to know these things. I decided to go ahead and include it, even though this is only partially related. And by the way, the old Nick thing, Saint Nick, old Nick, I'm not going to put it up here, but it's actually another term for Satan. So they know what they're doing. You know, this has penetrated Christianity because of the ignorance of Christians. And you're no longer ignorant. Now you know. So you got to do something about it. I'm going to play these and then we're going to get on. You're going to hear him saying ho, ho, ho in the background. This is really, you want your children associated with something that is related, totally related to this. If so, I'm going to pray for you. All right, I'm done complaining about the Christmas tree and Santa Claus. Let's get on with the rest of this study. This is Michael Rood. Hope you benefit from this, and then there's a little bit more to follow.
Shalom, Torah fans. This is Michael Rood in Jerusalem, and I am standing in one of my favorite teaching places in all of the land of Israel. I am standing in the mouth of a Tammuz cave, which is overlooking the Hinnom Valley, or the Valley of Gehenna, and I am facing to the east at the time of the winter solstice. This is the very birthday of Tammuz, who was worshipped here by the Canaanites, who brought all of their pagan sun god worship from the land of Babylon into this parcel of land that was promised to the sons of Shem. In this particular cave, on this time of year, at the time of the winter solstice, they actually did their child sacrifice, or their child mass, which means mass means sacrifice. And it was in this very location that we learn that the Canaanites had brought something into this land that the Israelites were not to learn anything about and have nothing to do. As the Almighty told Israel when they left Egypt and before they came into the land, he said, do not learn the way of the heathen. Do not learn how they worship and serve their gods, and do the same thing as if you're doing it for me, because it is an abomination. It is utterly detestable, repulsive, putrid, and vile. I want you to do nothing and know nothing about the way that they serve their gods, because the way that I want to be served, the Almighty said, is according to the commandments that I give you, according to the feast of the Lord, and according to the temple service. And it was right across this valley, over on the Temple Mount, that the priests of Israel were to conduct the worship service for the nation of Israel, and that is where the true God made his abode, and where he wanted to be worshipped in spirit and in truth. We read about the Tammuz cave and about the worship of Tammuz in Ezekiel chapter 8. When we speak of Tammuz in the Western world, and when people read Ezekiel 8 in the Western world, they are, for the most part, absolutely clueless what they are reading. But here in the land of Israel, and in this part of the world, this is basic common knowledge. Everyone in this area knows about this Tammuz cave. They know what was conducted here. They know the way of the heathen. They know about the worship service at the birthday of Tammuz on the pagan calendar. It was at the time of the winter solstice, but we have to remember that at the time that this worship service was put in place, it was on Tammuz's birthday, which back before the precession of the equinoxes, it was on actually December 25th, which is the birthday of Tammuz. But here in the land of Israel, we are going to set this context for you, because it says in Ezekiel 8 that there were priests, Kohanim, in the temple who had their back to the temple. They were facing the sun and they were worshiping the sun. And there was even a greater abomination that was going on, and that was women in the temple weeping for Tammuz. Now, what I would like to do is give you a little bit of background on these things because of the significance of the worship that got into Israel through the Levites and the Kohanim, through all the people of Israel, and they became so polluted that that is why judgment came upon the entire nation of Israel. First, the 10 northern tribes were taken into captivity because of their adaptation and acceptance of pagan sun god worship that was brought in by the Canaanites. And then finally, Judah got into this very same thing. In Ezekiel, in the 9th chapter, Ezekiel saw by revelation the Spirit of Yahweh leave from over the Ark of the Covenant and stand in the doorway of the temple, where the voice of Yah cried out to the angels that were standing across the doorway, and he told one of the angels who had an inkhorn to go out and mark the foreheads of everyone in the nation of Israel who was crying out against the abominations that were being committed by Israel. After that angel completed his job, he came back. Everyone was marked. Then the voice spoke out from the cloud of glory, "Angels, take your slaughtering instruments and go out and slaughter every man, woman, and child, beginning at the temple. Don't spare a soul, but don't you dare touch one who has the inkhorn angel mark on their forehead, because they are the ones who have been crying out against these abominations." Now, to fully understand the abominations that Israel was involved in, I need to take you back to the land of Shinar, where the Canaanite sun god worship all began. And in the ancient land of Shinar, we go back to the time of Noah and Noah's son Ham. It says that Ham had a son, and his youngest son's name was Canaan. And Canaan was involved in a situation with Noah in which Noah said, Canaan is cursed. Canaan is going to be a servant of Shem and Japheth. Now, we see what happened with Canaan. His grandson was Nimrod.
I have to stop there so you don't get confused. What he just said does not agree with my Bible. This is the genealogy I have here. I want to let him get to his point, but I wanted to clarify that as far as I can tell, Canaan is an uncle to Nimrod. He's a brother of Cush. It just doesn't make sense. And he said something else there, that Canaan was the youngest son, and it's a couple of things that didn't add up. Canaan should be the oldest. The others weren't born yet. Anyway, all right, I wanted to point that out real quick.
Everyone in this part of the world knows who Nimrod is. Most of the people in the West have heard of Nimrod. But Nimrod established a one-world government, a political, economic, and religious system in the plain of Shinar, in which he was worshipped as a god. Now, to end this god worship of Nimrod, according to some of the ancient records, it was Shem, Noah's oldest son, that slaughtered Nimrod and strewn his body part throughout the land of Shinar, which...
So I have to stop there again. I believe there's two stories. There's one that came from Semiramis on how Nimrod died that was fed to the people. It was a lie. It was fabricated. I believe Nimrod was killed. There's rabbinical legend that says Shem was involved, and also Esau. We'll get to all of that later, but what I wanted to point out right now was that this is also what the Freemasons believe. And it's a little bit graphic. Their 30, I believe it's either 32nd or 33rd degree ceremony is pretty graphic on the whole thing. It involves, the male penis that supposedly she impregnated herself with and gave birth to Tammuz and all of that. But I wanted to point out that this is what the Freemasons believe, is that he was decapitated, cut into pieces, his male organs separated from him. They were afraid of him reproducing. She got a hold of it supposedly in time. I'm telling you what they believe. I'm not saying that any of this is true. I'm telling you what the Freemasons believe, and they do a ceremony from it. And these are the people that run the world. So, you might be interested in what they think, because it affects us. anyway, the whole thing where, she impregnated herself, gave birth to Tammuz, and all of that. So, all right.
Should have effectively ended the worship of Nimrod. But Nimrod's wife Semiramis, not willing to let the kingdom slip through her fingers so easily as that, said that Nimrod really didn't die. Nimrod ascended up into heaven and has become the sun. And from that, the priest, the knowledgeable priest among the Babylonians, among the worship of Nimrod, they put in place a sun calendar. The Babylonians were the ones that divided up the year into 4 quadrants. The winter solstice, which was the rebirth of the sun, which we'll get into in a minute. The summer solstice, which is the longest day of the year, on the absolute opposite end of the solar calendar, and the vernal and the autumnal equinox. And these things were put in place as the development of Babylonian sun god worship was brought into its fullness. And in fact, the Babylonian sun calendar is still in use all over the world because the Romans adapted it through Julius Caesar, the Julian calendar, and then later it was adopted and updated by Pope Gregory, the Gregorian calendar. But it is basically the Babylonian sun god worship calendar. Now, what happened when Nimrod ascended up into heaven? Quite a while later, his wife Semiramis became pregnant, but not in a way that you would expect. No, her explanation was her husband, Nimrod, impregnated her with the rays of the sun, and she brought forth the reincarnated Nimrod as Tammuz, and his birthday on the ancient Babylonian calendar, December 25th, the time of the winter solstice. That is the shortest day of the year, by the way, and that is when the sun begins its ascension, and there you have a link to the entire pagan sun god worship calendar and festivals that originated in the land of Shinar. Now, what happened with the reincarnated Nimrod as Tammuz, born on December 25th? You would expect that Tammuz would live forever, but such was not the case. Tammuz was killed in a freak hunting accident when he was gored to death by a wild boar. And so the worshipers of Tammuz then set aside 40 days of weeping for Tammuz because it was in the 40th year of his life that he was killed. So they set aside the 40 days of weeping for Tammuz, in which the sun god worshipers would deny themselves a pleasure in this life for the pleasure of Tammuz in his afterlife. Quite a while later, Semiramis, his mother, died. And she was so venerated that the story goes that she ascended up into heaven and the gods returned her to earth on the first Sunday. That's when the sun god worshipers worshiped their sun god, Nimrod and Tammuz. And on the first Sunday after the vernal equinox, that is when Semiramis was returned to earth in this giant egg, which landed in the Euphrates River. It cracked open, and out emerged Semiramis, reincarnated as Easter, the bare-breasted goddess of fertility and sexual desire, who came out of that egg and turned a bird into an egg-laying rabbit in order to proclaim her divinity. Now, at that point, the 40 days of weeping for Tammuz were stacked up in front of the day in which his mother was reincarnated as Easter, the Queen of Heaven. And so you have the 40 days of weeping for Tammuz, which is now called Lent in America at least. And then on Easter Sunday, when Semiramis was reincarnated as the pagan sex goddess, that is when they killed the wild boar that killed Tammuz, and that's why everyone ate ham on Easter Sunday as a completion of the sun god worship festival of Easter. Now, of course, in the West, people use the word Easter as if it has something to do with the Bible. It has nothing to do with the Bible. This is pure pagan sun god worship. And in this cave on December 25th, or as the winter solstice moved back through the period of time, this is where they had the child mass. Mass meaning sacrifice. They sacrificed infant babies here in this cave at the time of the child mass. Now it's called Christ Mass. I guess it's been changed a little bit somehow, but It is all Babylonian sun god worship that I'm explaining. Now, what happens with at the time of the reincarnation of Easter, then what we have are the pagan priest, the Canaanite priest, who would impregnate virgins on the altar of Easter right here in this cave, and then a year later, when those babies are 3 months old, they sacrifice those 3-month-old infants, and then they would dye the eggs of Easter in the blood of sacrificed infants. The amazing thing is, to this very day, we can walk down this valley up into Jaffa Gate into one denomination's building on Easter Sunday, and they will have the eggs of Easter dyed one color, and one color only, blood red. If you ask the parishioners sitting in the pews why it's blood red, they have no idea, but it goes right back to what took place in this cave. This is what Israel adopted and were taken into captivity by Shalmaneser. These are some of the practices that Judah took into their bosom and became a part of their worship life, and they were taken captivity into Babylon. Now, as I have described all this, it's important to understand that after the Babylonian worship cycle was all put in place, that is when the Almighty knew that there was no amount of evil that would be able to be taken, that would be withheld from these people. And so he decided to confuse the languages, and at that point, he spread these people out by different languages all over the earth. And that is why, even to this very day, you see that Jupiter, the Greek sun god, was born on December 25th. You see Ra, the Egyptian sun god, was born on December 25th. You see that Mithra, the Roman sun god, that's who Constantine worshiped, he was born on December 25th. Now, how can all this be? How is it that the worship of Easter is even found in remote areas such as China and Russia, Japan, America, Canada? Why is this? Because the confusion of languages scattered these people all over the land. The Almighty said, this is not to be, this is not to be, and he said when the iniquity of the Amorites, which is a family of the Canaanites, comes to a full, in the fullness of time, he is going to bring the Israelites out of Egypt to inhabit this land and purge it of every last vestige of pagan sun god worship, so that the worship of the true God can be here in the land of Israel. The Almighty has told us right from the beginning of Genesis, come out of Babylon. He told Abraham to come out of Babylon, and in the end, in the book of Revelation, he again says, come out of Babylon. Now we are going to go up into the Galilee region, up where the 10 northern tribes were taken from, and also people from the land of Sumer were brought into this land and brought in their pagan worship. And it is in this area where we have Israelites, we have Samaritans. This is what is called the area of Galilee of the nations, and this is where Yeshua lived and conducted most of his ministry.
The resurrection of the Messiah from the dead was the most significant event that the world has ever seen. And what better way to teach our children about the depth of this long-awaited victory over sin and death than by telling them that a pink rabbit snuck in through the air vent of their house in the middle of the night and left baskets full of chocolate eggs and a bunch of pink Walmart crap hidden under the cushions. And then after that, after they've nearly had a diabetic seizure, you take them down to the local cathedral and observe the ancient Mass of Ishtar, the Assyrian and Babylonian goddess of war and sex. Now, does something about this seem a little strange to anyone else out there? I mean, is that a little weird? So what is this Easter deal anyways? I remember being a bit confused as a kid. I mean, what's up with the Easter bunny? What does that have to do with the resurrection, you know? Although we convince our kids that rabbits lay colorful eggs in the bushes, we know that this is not reality. This story is not as innocent and cute as many think. So, what's going on here? Where does this all come from anyways? Yeah, I don't want to make up any more fictional stories than there already are floating around out there. So let us just consult the mother of all churches and see what she has to say about all this. Easter. The English term relates to Estre, a Teutonic goddess of the rising light of day and spring. That's interesting. Okay. So what does that have to do with the resurrection, the goddess here? You know, some of the other names for this ancient Teutonic mother goddess, they include Ishtar, Istre, Astarte, Ostarte, Ostera, Astereth. These are all names that originated from the original mother goddess Semiramis, the mother of Tammuz. In short, Ishtar was the wife of Baal, also called the Queen of Heaven. Wait a second here. Ishtar was the wife of Baal? Baal-Sabab? Satan's wife? That's just great. I mean, I'm really glad for Ishtar. You know, she made a good choice. Scholars of comparative mythology draw a parallel between the Egyptian goddess Isis and the Babylonian goddess Ishtar. Ishtar was called Astereth, or the Queen of Heaven, by the Israelites. You can read that in Judges chapter 2, or Jeremiah, I think is chapter 44 maybe. This mother goddess, well known in the Eastern world, was frequently worshipped as the goddess of sex. Orgies and temple prostitutes were often used in her worship. Now, what in the world does the goddess of sex have to do with the resurrection of Christ? And if you read what the churches have to say, they'll actually admit that the Easter egg might come from ancient paganism. Oh, what a light way of saying it. Let's look at this a little bit farther. So, what is an Easter egg? What's the deal with the Easter bunny? Where does this stuff come from anyways? And they just make it up out of thin air, or what? Well, the answers to this question, they aren't hard to pin down. The origins of these things are very well documented. All you have to do is take a couple of hours, do some unbiased research in any decent library, and you'll find all these things out for yourself very easily. Here's the original Easter story in a nutshell, real fast, okay? All right. According to the ancient historian Josephus, Nimrod, you know, the king of Babylon, was punished for his rebellion at the Tower of Babel by Noah's son Shem. His body was cut into many pieces and sent to the surrounding communities as a warning against idolatry. Nimrod's wife, Semiramis, the queen of Babylon, she claimed that he did not actually die, but rather ascended into heaven and had become the sun god. She, of course, being the wife of the sun, had to make herself into a goddess. I mean, that's just automatic, you know. Now, Semiramis taught that the moon was a goddess that went through a 28-day cycle and ovulated when it was a full moon. She then claimed that she came down from the moon in a giant moon egg that fell into the Euphrates River and hatched open, and she came out the bare-breasted, you know, Ishtar. This incident, according to her story, supposedly happened at the time of the first full moon after the spring equinox. Does that ring any bells out there? Just checking. Semiramis then became known as Ishtar, and her moon egg became known as Ishtar's egg. Ishtar, a.k.a. Semiramis, she claimed that she had become pregnant then by the rays of the sun. And then later she had this little baby, they named him Tammuz. Now here's where we meet the little Ishtar bunny. Tammuz was noted to be especially fond of rabbits. He really liked the little bunny rabbits. And they became sacred in the ancient religion. I mean, after all, Tammuz was considered to be the kid of the new sun god, now named Baal. You know, Tammuz, like his supposed daddy Nimrod, became a really good hunter. Later one day, when Tammuz grew up and was 40 years old, he was actually killed by a wild boar while out hunting. And Ishtar, being the eternal sex goddess of the sun, used the rabbit that Tammuz likes so much in her religion as a sign of sexual desire and fertility. Now, rabbits are still a sign of sexual desire and fertility to this day. That's pretty much common knowledge. We all know about that. Now, Easter, by the time her son Tammuz was killed, was worshipped as the mother of God and the queen of heaven. She continued to build her mystery religion and proclaimed this 40-day period of time of sorrow each year prior to the anniversary of the death of her son Tammuz. During this time of 40 days, no meat was to be eaten. If you want more on this weeping for Tammuz, you can read about it and what God has to say about it. In Ezekiel chapter 8, he kind of condemns it a little bit. Ever since Semiramis instituted her Babylonian mystery religion all across the world, every year on the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox, a sunrise mass or sacrifice was made to Ishtar, in which the priest of Easter would impregnate virgins on the altar at sunrise. Those virgins then became pregnant, and a year later, that next coming spring around the time of Easter, those infants were usually about 3 months old, and they would be sacrificed on the altar of Easter, and the priests would then dye Ishtar's eggs in their blood. You'd think that this practice would be dead, but it's not dead. We all know that that practice is not dead. Still very much alive and well today. The March 21st sacrifice itself to the goddess Ostara, which is another name for Easter, is still on the Luciferian and Satanic calendar of occult holidays, even to this day. Now, these sick practices are strongly condemned by the God of the Hebrew Scriptures anyways. As even the children of Israel, they got deceived into doing it for a time. But now we would never fall for something like that. I mean, after all, we've got it all figured out, don't we?
And now you know the rest of the story. All right, let's listen to some music. I think you get the point. Celebrate Easter. By the way, I think we've touched on this before. How many days are there? Days and nights between Friday and Sunday? The one sign that Yeshua said that we would know him by without mistake was 3 days and 3 nights in the tomb before he would resurrect from the dead. And we've cut a day out of it. You can't make this stuff up. I mean, we have been so blinded by Mystery Babylon, but your eyes are opening. I mean, even I've been studying this for a while, and almost every time I get into this, I learn something else that I didn't know before. It's a process. Anyway, let's listen to some music. I think this is all pretty negative. Let's get out of this and listen to some music, something a little more lifting. Hope you enjoyed the video.